Many years ago, when I was a child, I listened to the same two readings at Mass on Sundays and feast days year after year after year. There were very few readings from the Old Testament. Now, this all changed dramatically with Vatican II and the introduction of the 3-year liturgical cycle with year A, B and C in 1969. Now, having such a liturgical cycle means that we hear much more of the Bible than previously. In fact, 1/6 of the Bible. On Sundays and major feast days, the first reading is always from the Old Testament, except during the Easter season, and the responsorial psalm is usually from the book of Psalms. So, if we are Mass-going Catholics, then we are exposed to quite a bit of the Old Testament. So what? How can such an ancient and strange book be relevant to our lives today? Understandably, the Old Testament can seem quite daunting to many people, and it can be really difficult to get excited by something so very old. But the more we understand from the history, the archaeology, the geography and the culture of the ancient context out of which the stories arose, the more we can appreciate what a treasure trove the Old Testament actually is. The mere fact that it survived for so long in itself testifies to the fact of its enduring significance. I'd like to outline just a few of the many ways in which the Old Testament is relevant today. We can find many important principles in its pages applicable today. First, we can learn from the book of Genesis about care for our common home. Now, as we know, this theme is very dear to Pope Francis's heart. The biblical account tells us that we are to till and keep the earth, but as one commentator points out, we have done too much tilling and not enough keeping. Second, we learn that we are made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, each of us is worthy of the utmost dignity and respect. In addition, in the ancient world, the word image was used for a statue of a god that represented the god's presence in the temple. In human society, the king was the image of God, meaning that his rule was really an extension of divine rule. In Genesis, however, image is extended to include all humanity. Humans then signify God's presence on earth. Imagine that. Of course, with this remarkable privilege comes great responsibility, care for the earth. It is because humans take on this task that God's work is completed, and so God can rest on the 7th day. Third, in Exodus and Deuteronomy, we learn about caring for the most vulnerable in society. In biblical times, they were the widows and the orphans, and how we are to treat the stranger among us, surely relevant today. Fourth, we learn from the prophets, especially Amos and Isaiah, about issues of social justice. Isaiah turned a really harsh, scathing eye on the rich and their debauched lifestyle, made possible by the exploitation of the poor. He was also greatly troubled by gross injustice in the real estate market and land-grabbing greed, again highly relevant today. Fifth, I find it fascinating that near the middle of the book of Leviticus, the book that most of us find extremely dull and boring, we find the great teaching about loving our neighbour as ourselves. Now, Leviticus itself is the middle book of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, known by Jews as the Torah. So, this crucial teaching about loving our neighbours as ourselves, with so many implications today, is a very clear statement about what it essentially means to be the people of God. Sixth, the Old Testament is a wonderful resource for prayer, particularly the book of Psalms. Every emotion we could ever possibly experience is recorded there in breathtaking honesty. And who has not prayed or sung Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd"? Sing or pray it often enough, and you won't just get to know the song, but more importantly, the shepherd. Finally, it's important to remember that the Old Testament has had a tremendous influence on some of the great works of art, literature, music, and opera in the Western world. So the more you know about the Old Testament, the richer will be your experience of these great treasures that have the power to feed our very soul. So next time you listen to Leonard Cohen's Alleluia, see how many Old Testament references you can hear. In addition, our English language is peppered with Old Testament sayings. For example, to escape by the skin of one's teeth, a drop in the bucket, to everything there is a season, the ends of the earth, eat, drink and be merry, bite the dust, how the mighty have fallen, and nothing but skin and bones. Now here's a challenge for you. Look at the 10 Commandments in Exodus and explore their relevance today. For example, who are the strange gods in your life? How do you treat your parents or elders? How honest are you in your dealings with others? Is Sunday Mass on your schedule?